Hey y'all, Farmer Dre back at it. It's on a beautiful, wet, gloomy day here on the farm. I am standing out here in the high tunnel, and today I'm going to share some of the biggest things I learned about growing tomatoes in 2021. So I've been growing tomatoes here on our farm for a while. This is my 4th season growing tomatoes, and you guys would think by now that I would know everything about growing tomatoes. No, I'm just messing around. There's always something to learn. Every year is different disease pressures, different insect pressures. So yeah, there's always something to learn. And like everything else here on the farm, you know, I do things by trial and error, and you learn from one year to another. Whenever you first start off, you learn some of the basic stuff, and then whenever you get a few years down the road, you're trying to fine-tune the way you're growing tomatoes. So today I'm going to be sharing some of the most important things that I learned here on our farm and what I'll be doing different for next year and years going on with growing tomatoes here on our farm. So one of the biggest things that I learned this season is no more field tomatoes. So here on our farm, I made a complete video about this a while back talking about field tomatoes. But some of the things that I mentioned in there is, you know, we're getting to that point where our customers enjoy and appreciate the value of high tunnel tomatoes, and we just trained them over the years, and they just really appreciate what we're doing in the high tunnel. So the field tomatoes don't do good for us here on our farm. So in the future, that's one of the things we're going to do is no more field tomatoes. All the tomatoes we do grow here on our farm are going to be under plastic in high tunnels. If y'all remember back in the spring, I did plant in high tunnel number 1. I planted different varieties of tomatoes just to see, just messing around with them, seeing what I was going to try. So I did plant Big Dinas, which are indeterminate tomatoes, and then of course I grew the Red Deuce. And one of the biggest things I learned, and I kind of knew this in the back of my head whenever I did plant those, is those indeterminates for us here on our farm just take too much time, too much energy to prune and stake and to grow out. And but the biggest thing I learned is they don't produce enough to justify me putting that time and energy into it. In the future, we're only going to be planting determinate varieties just because you kind of plant them, you guys just got to manage them, and they're just easier to manage. And whenever it comes to the production standpoint, I mean, just look at these Red Deuce in here. They are technically a determinate, but I mean, these are Carolina Golds here. Look at that, they're still coming on strong. It's almost November, and look at this. They're still producing. So it is absolutely amazing what these Red Deuce have done. And like I mentioned, they're just one of my favorite varieties I'm going to be growing. And this is probably the only variety I'm going to be growing in the future. Variety selection is very, very, very important when it comes to your operation and figuring out what works. I'm going to think next year I'm going to try some different varieties of the determinants. I heard of the BHN 589 are really good. I planted a few number 2 there, but they didn't work out too well. But next year, I'm going to try maybe a couple rows of the BHN to compare them to the Red Deuce when it comes to production, comes to plant stability, and how the plant turns out as well. So, yeah, only determinate tomato plants here on our farm, and mainly all Red Deuce. Now, from a plant's perspective, if you guys remember, I did battle quite a few diseases this year, especially in high tunnel number 1. In 2020, in fall of 2020, I did plant strawberries in number 2 there, and I believe on the strawberry plants that the plugs that we bought, they came in with a few insects, and those insects carried on from one tunnel to another. So what I learned this year is you cannot, you know, slack off on managing your tomatoes from the disease and insect pressures, because if you take a week off or you take, you know, you're busy doing something else and you're not in your tunnels, either you have someone watching and maintaining them or looking at them, or you're in here pretty much every single day just managing the crop, you will see crop loss long term. And I saw that this year, especially in high tunnel number 1, where, you know, we got busy, and we get busy all the time, and that's why we're just focusing on strictly certain crops, and like I mentioned, only high tunnel tomatoes. So, you know, if we only have high tunnel tomatoes, then I can manage them a little easier. And the instant you see a disease pressure, disease insect issue, then you got to take care of it. There's no waiting. So especially in a confined area like a high tunnel, if you have issue in a corner of the high tunnel, that's going to spread like wildfire and infect your entire high tunnel. And if your high tunnel is infected, then you're spending more time on managing it. You're spending more money on chemical. But if you're out here maintaining your crop and watching it and just managing correctly, you can kind of spot treat the area. So let's say one plant or a few plants on the end rows where the doors are, or on the outside to get let's say mites come through in here, and you just see on the outside plants, but you don't see it on the inside plants. So you go ahead and spot treat those outside rows without hitting the entire tunnel with the chemical or protection that you need. So another major thing I learned this year, and I'm gonna apply it in the rest of my tunnels next year, is the shade cloth. I didn't realize how much of importance the shade cloth had. We only have one black shade cloth, and it's on this tunnel this year. And I put it on here just because these tomatoes were flowering right when it was getting hot. And in the other tunnels, I didn't put any shade cloth on. And I saw the results this year in this tunnel of the shade cloth. The shade cloth just kind of cools the air temperature and cools the power of the sun on top of the tomatoes by 5 or 10 degrees. But that 5 or 10 degrees has a really big impact on the tomatoes in here. And you know, in back of my mind, I knew it was important, but I never really applied it, and I never really put much emphasis on putting the shade cloth on. And you know, it was mid-July, and we were harvesting some beautiful tomatoes out of here. And then in number one, we were having some heat issues just because it was getting extremely hot. You know, some days it was reaching over 100 degrees in number one, and number one had no shade cloth. And we were pulling some beauties out of here, and I was like, man, that investment of a shade cloth is well worth it, just because of the quality of the tomatoes and just the yield. I mean, I'm telling you guys, it was absolutely amazing. And if you're able to protect your tomatoes from that direct sun, from that direct summer heat, your tomatoes will be doing 100 times better. The yield out of this tunnel alone here this year is just mind-blowing to me. I'm gonna make a complete video on the yield and how much we you know, made off the tomatoes and everything. But you know, shade cloth is one of those deals where, you know, I didn't put much emphasis on it in years past, but moving forward, I believe we're going to, and not that I believe, we are going to do it and put shade cloth on all of our tunnels whenever the, you know, last week of May, first week of June, just so we could protect the tomato plants from frying up and just keep the plants much healthier. Whenever it comes to the heat of the summer with tomatoes, the biggest issue is on the tomato itself. You get what's called the white core. You get a big old, around the stem of the plant, or the stem of the tomato. Let me try to find a tomato here that's decent in size. Anyways, you have this tomato where the stem is here, and where the stem is attached throughout the entire where the stem was placed there, it's just a solid of core white all the way through. So the inside, it's like the core of an apple where you can't eat it. But that's the same thing that happens in a tomato whenever you get extreme heat. And those tomatoes are canners. I mean, you can't sell them as number ones. And it's a visible, you visibly see it around each individual where, you know, when you're harvesting, there's a yellow ring around where the stem was attached. And that's just one of those things where if you have, our goal here is to grow as many number ones as possible. And if you're not growing number ones, you're losing money. And if you got to put tomatoes in the canner's box, you're not getting prime dollar on your tomato. So that's the biggest thing about the actual physical tomato. But then I saw a lot of impact of what the shade cloth had on the tomato plants themselves, just because they're just much healthier, less disease pressure due to the heat. So yeah, shade cloth is a must for next year whenever we are going to be growing our tomatoes. And technically we should have took the shade cloth off about the first week of September. But, you know, tomato sales, we are still picking quite a few. I mean, we're still picking 200 to 300 pounds out of here every week. And you know, now the shade cloth is actually damaging the crop instead of benefiting. But next week they're projecting our first frost, so I think we're just gonna try to save the tomatoes for another couple of weeks in here. But you know, after a while, tomatoes will be done for. They're gonna freeze, and then we're gonna have to clean them out. And then whenever we clean out the tunnel and plant our cover crop, then we will put the shade cloth up, roll it up. We gotta wait until it dries up on the roof there, and then we'll put it in the storage whenever it's nice and dry, so we can hold it on for next year. The nice thing about the physical shade cloths here is they're good for many years. We've had this since 2018, and you can see here it's still nice, intact, nice and good. And it's just, if you keep it nice and clean and untorn, then it's easier to put on next year. I mentioned there's many things to learn, but you know, every single year you keep on growing, you keep on expanding the farm, keep on growing your knowledge of production and growing your plants out. So yeah, in here when we planting. I still got to come through here and plant my stuff. I'll probably do later on today sometime, but we'll see. But yeah, always something new to learn, always something to improve on. But you know what? That's the beauty of agriculture. That's the beauty of farming. And that's the beauty of growing tomatoes, is you're always willing to improve, or there's always something to improve. And if you're willing to learn and keep on expanding your knowledge in production, that's the only way to do it. Hey y'all, this is gonna be it for today. Just sharing some of the things I did learn in 2021, growing tomatoes, and I'm gonna be applying them next year. And you know, tomatoes are never going away here on our farm, even though we are focusing our energy on other crops. Tomatoes is one of those, it's a staple. I mean, you have to have tomatoes in your farm market, at farmers markets. So all kinds of good stuff happening here. But I want to say thanks for watching up to this point. If you guys haven't already, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button if you guys enjoyed today's video. Don't forget, hit that notification icon so you guys can be notified whenever I do upload a video. I want to say thanks for watching up to this point. Y'all have a good day, and we will see you next time.